Hello, party people. Hey, hi, how you doing? We are going to talk about actually one of the most important aspects of pro wrestling, kayfabe. Now, what is kayfabe? It's a word that has multiple different meanings. Simply just like a code word that wrestlers would use to let them know that like fans were nearby, or just like people who weren't privy to the working style. Now, the current meaning of kayfabe basically is like the in character universe that gets created by pro wrestling. Even though kayfabe is still very much like a pro wrestling term, I do believe that the effects of kayfabe have already stretched far beyond pro wrestling. I just think, unfortunately, pro wrestling was about 100 years ahead of the curve. Almost exists as like this alternate form of storytelling outside of fiction and nonfiction, or like even realistic fiction, because that is like still a fully artificial story. Artificial story based on real events that already happened, not an artificial story based upon the reaction of real people in the moment. It is a very, very different medium, and at this point, it is one that has stretched like far beyond the borders of pro wrestling. Originally, kayfabe represented basically just like executives putting their thumb on the scales of actual competitive events in order to help make more money and boost ticket sales. One of the main reasons why I say pro wrestling was ahead of the curve is because a lot of the, sports practices that you see a lot of people complain about are the actual foundations of pro wrestling, right? A lot of executives putting their thumb on the scales of real legitimate competition in order to help boost sales and make more money. Maybe even like veering away from sports and truly going into performance, a show like American Idol, which had like there's documented proof that they more were willing to choose people based on what would make a good show rather than the people who they believed would win the competition. All of these things sort of end up creating a network of stories that tend to be intertwined with each other still. And the template that all of these people are quietly using is the template of catch as catch can wrestling. Now, what is that? Catch as catch can wrestling is pro wrestling. It's also known as catch wrestling. None of these names are insanely important to remember. So pro wrestling mostly was held in like sports halls, basically just kind of like a place people would go to fight. So catch wrestling actually used to be a very legitimate form of wrestling. It was just one of many styles that was used in a lot of like sports halls at the time to settle like real disputes between people in the community. There was still like money being made in situations like this because there were tickets being sold, and unfortunately wrestling as a sport even now isn't that interesting, right? Aren't making a lot of money, and they kind of needed to make more money if they wanted to keep doing the thing. So eventually, the people who were taking up catch wrestling were just like, hey, what if we lie? So these wrestlers start quietly predetermining their matches, right? Throwing in different spots to help the match feel more entertaining for people so that they would not only feel more entertained while they were there, but they'd be more willing to come back for another show. This was going pretty good for a while. Like the catch wrestling was still very intermingled with the legitimate forms of wrestling. A lot of that due to like many athletes going back and forth between the different styles of wrestling, and catch wrestling just being one of them. All unfortunately kind of came to a head in like the 1930s because of a man named Jack Pfeffer. He was greedy. He was extremely greedy, and he outed the true nature of pro wrestling to the New York Times in like 1937, attempt to sabotage his rival promoters, and so to that effect, it did do its job. He also his business also fell in this time, but he managed to basically pivot into turning pro wrestling into much more of a circus act, eventually evolve into what we know as lucha libre today. So yeah, while Jack is solidifying the presence of pro wrestling in the circus, all of his rivals basically decided to double down on the realism of pro wrestling. I'd even argue like triple down at this point. This is when organizations like the NWA start getting formed, and the NWA almost like delegated the different developments of pro wrestling to different regions of the world. In my observation of the like evolution of pro wrestling, it can kind of be boiled down to America being the evolution of pro wrestling's character work, Japan being like the evolution of like that real mixed martial arts style, and I'm just gonna throw all of Europe together for this one to basically say that like Europe is very big on like the technical side of pro wrestling. You'll see a lot of people like Zack Sabre Jr. I believe Katsuyori Shibata even like spent some time in Britain, which is I believe the birthplace of pro wrestling. So you have all of these different places spending the next like 60 years basically turning pro wrestling into an actual like capital A art form, and it's done so fairly quietly. Like it absolutely has its audience of people, um, but it still isn't really able to wash off the stink that Jack Pfeiffer unfortunately kind of like placed onto it. And I mean, it maybe had a chance to get rid of it during the like golden age and the attitude era. However, Vince McMahon kind of decided to ruin that single-handedly. Around the turn of the century, Vince McMahon argued in open court that pro wrestling shouldn't have oversight from the athletic board because it is not a real sport. And I think at that point he was already using the term sports entertainment. This, along with situations like the curtain call, like Montreal Screwjob, all of the all of the crazy things, sort of like poked enough holes into the veil of kayfabe that by the time social media comes around, there was no hope for what it once was. Effectively, kayfabe, as we knew it, is and has been dead for a very long time. However, I do believe just as words evolve in just regular language, I believe the word of kayfabe has since evolved. I still believe that kayfabe is like that in-universe kind of meaning, but I just believe that it has expanded beyond the borders of what we once knew it was, right? It is able to encapsulate a wrestler's entire life. It is able to encapsulate the inner workings of a wrestling promotion, like down to like what the head promoter like had for breakfast that day, and like all of these things actually do contribute to kayfabe in a way that like truly has been flying under the radar, and it's like kind of my favorite thing to see. So, I guess good question to ask. Is kayfabe dead? No. It just did like the thing that the one jellyfish does, where like it gets old and instead of dying, it just becomes a baby again. Kayfabe is a jellyfish. There we go. Perfect video. Catch wrestling was Catch wrestling was Jesus Christ. Okay, hold on. Okay. um so catch wrestling did